All right. Hi there. My name is Charles Zatique, and I'll be sharing with you a little bit more about my final project, a literature review entitled Mapping Music Education Narratives. I'm a Sizzle PhD student, and I chose to create this literature review in order to benefit my future research trajectory, and also with partial inspiration from Dr. McVie and Dr. Sandra Stauffer, who I profiled for my narrative spotlight. A little bit more context and general info before we dive into the specifics. Music is a vital component of persons' lives at all stages, and likewise, musical studies comprise a valuable portion of students' in school and extracurricular lives. A fantastic overview of music and narrative is found in Dr. Sandra Stauffer's entry, Narrative Inquiry and the Uses of Narrative in Music Education Research, in the Oxford Handbook of Qualitative Research in American Music Education. As a narrative researcher, Stauffer comments on and proves that music is subject to a core narrative which is thought to have begun with Lowell Mason in the 19th century. Music is a subject taught during the school day and reaches its full consummation with in-school music performances and vocal and instrumental performance. There are many manifold problems with this core narrative. They boil down to a sequence of 5 issues. That music is an experience which envelops most, if not all, facets of human experience. In-school music making is not the center of music making. In-school performances are not the best and highest utility of music learning. Creative expression in music is important but neglected component of many school music curricula. And successful musicians do not always, if ever, accomplish all their goals with an in-school study alone, as one would intuit about other disciplines like engineering and medicine. So again, these are based off of Stauffer's theoretizations in the Oxford Handbook and all of the sources which tie back to the foundations of narrative research um, based on her experience and her application to the music ed discipline. And so, just really briefly, I rehashed all of those points in order to positively frame them, and they're included here in the slide, as you can see. A is the same. B, I reframed it to say quality music making takes place in equal parts during the school day as well as after school or on the weekends or off campus. So basically, to say that um, the focus is on multiple places and that the school can be a hub of that, but it could also be more other places which are included in that process for a learner. Then musical study provides innumerable benefits, of which the in-school performance is just one limited measure. So, in other words, the winter concert, which I'm getting ready to prepare for this week, actually, is not the be-all, end-all of what did kids learn. And of course, asking for that to happen is really not realistic to say, okay, what did kids learn in class all semester? To turn to one 60-minute performance is not going to demonstrably show that, and that seems should make intuitive sense to a lot of us. But that was one of the conclusions that Stauffer reached, and I framed it positively in that way for point C. And then, of course, D, creative expression, is a priority in high quality contemporary music instruction. And just bringing in a little bit of prior knowledge and schema to the conversation, creative expression is a growing field of discussion in the music space and the music education space across disciplines. I think that the focus as technology changes and instrumental instruction changes, I think that creative expression is gaining more and more momentum. Also, between that and multimodal instruction in the ELA classrooms, there's potential for collaboration, and there's a lot of potential for collaboration with the STEAM space and the idea of trying to influence makers and to support people who want to become makers. And that can take place in the music classroom as well via creative expression. And last but not least, E, successful musicians will likely obtain experiences out of school. And anybody who has become a musician will understand that, and that there's only so many minutes in the school day. And somebody who's going to do whatever it takes in order to become a musician in the outside world, they're really going to take more time than the 120 minutes or 80 minutes a week of music class time in order to cultivate that. And again, that should make sense intuitively if you think about people who are interested in other professions. If you think about people who eventually become doctors after going through K through 12, they're now learning all of that in the science classroom for sure. And so hopefully the music space is not subject to any different type of standard in that regard. So next up is the research questions that we considered. Essentially, the project of reviewing literature is seeking to map out what is extant in this crossover space between narrative research and the world of music making and music learning. I was open to having the research questions shift or change over time. So far, it's looking like they're broad enough that I think they should be an effective catch-all for all the types of resources which we will end up finding. One concern is that we don't necessarily know the distribution of the articles. What percentage of articles will have collected stories from a student perspective, from a music teacher's perspective, from a professional musician's perspective? What percentage of articles will collect stories about band, about practicing vocal music, about learning how to do composition or improvisation, the concept of general music, some other musical practice? There are very, very many potentials for sure. Methodology. As online learners, we all know that the UB Library website is an excellent resource. I started and ended there for all of my research needs on this project. It would have been nice to do so as a local, sit inside the UB Library and perhaps wander the 700s like I used to do for my undergraduate musicology courses. Unfortunately, this being impossible, the Delivery Plus team was on hand for any book chapters, and all the articles and studies were mostly available in online format. And this is really the wave of the future and the present, and I didn't sense any disadvantage by conducting my research online. I did a variety of different topical search terms, and the first two attempts were pretty unsuccessful, and I did start to get nervous. I was really thinking, oh my god, how could there only be 5 narrative studies about music? This is not possible. So I rejiggered the search terms, and the third time was a charm, and the system pulled up actually several hundred articles with the keywords contained, and the first 50 articles really contained the pieces I needed. So far, I seem to have found about approximately 20 or 23 articles. So, in terms of proposed results and discussion, it's not a research proposal that we're discussing here, it's just a literature review. But I figured in order to structure our conversation here on this PowerPoint, I could hypothesize some of the findings just to get a sense of the process and how it should go. In terms of proposed results and discussion, we are looking for a balance between the sources of the narrative stories themselves. In other words, the profession is somewhat broad and expansive in addition to being very deep. And so at that point, we're wondering to see what proportion of the narrative studies that are extant will have dealt with, say, high school orchestra, as opposed to perhaps dealing with undergraduate level music theory or early childhood, general music pedagogy. So again, there's many different stops along the way of K through 12 or even preschool through college music making and music learning. And so we need to see what type of balance or imbalance may exist in the extant literature in terms of the perspective of what stories are being collected and from whom. The next point is that we also need to take a look at the balance between what types of content is being covered in the stories, whether they are coming from an instructor's point of view, a pre-service teacher's point of view, a practicing professional musician's point of view, or a young person at any age. What the stories must be talking about will most likely vary between participation in an orchestra, participation in a choral ensemble, participation in some other type of musical activity, improvisation, composition, general music theory, or something along those lines. Therefore, we really need to keep track, as I said, and I'm hoping that we can find that and that I can maybe represent that visually in the literature review. And last but not least, we do want to keep an eye on the quality and validity of methods used. And the reason why I point that out is because I must say there were a couple, if not 3 or 4 articles already that I found that use the term narrative and the term music in the abstract. And then when they begin to evaluate the program or the phenomenon in question, and there was a variety of them, they were not actually collecting people's stories. They were using a qualitative method and asking interview questions and doing interviews, but ultimately that ended up being just a regular old qualitative study, and there was no story gathering happening. One of them had to do with narrative therapy, and so that one was fascinating because it was a full-on quantitative psychological study using a narrative therapy intervention. And so the intervention was documented and implemented and analyzed, and they used ANOVA and MANOVA to check the effect size and the variance and all of that for what was a narrative therapy intervention that was experimental. And so that one really got me going because I was thinking, oh my goodness, it's narrative therapy used in a music therapy context. I mean, can we not at least gather some stories from participants and actually do a narrative evaluation of a narrative program? But alas, I digress. And that one did not make it onto the literature review because that was a quantitative study and not a narrative study. So, looking forward at proposed implications for future research, I can only imagine that we're going to see a few more imbalances in the areas that we described above. Narrative being a newer method, I can only imagine that its application to the music field will likely not be complete or comprehensive. That is to say that the folks in the scholarly community who have taken the time and effort and made those studies or written up those studies or written those articles, they may or may not have gotten to every single facet of the music learning experience because there are many facets. So far, most, if not all, the pieces written that I found have been from the 21st century, pardon the typo. Yeah, not too much before 2000, and a lot of things in the past 5 years. So that's very exciting, and that kind of tells me that it's all happening right now. And so, as we all know, taking this course, that this is all part of our personal research trajectory and our global research discipline. And so that's great. I really feel like there's an opportunity for myself and many, many other people to help fill in some of these gaps that I've been discussing. In conclusion, I really want to bring it all the way back to Sandra Stauffer, whom I covered for the narrative spotlight, and other scholars as well, who did a fantastic job really paving the way for narrative research in music over the past 20 years. Certainly standing on the shoulders of giants there, and certainly those pieces of work in terms of grounding the theoretical constructs and grounding the methodology had to happen first. There is an annual music narrative in music education conference every year. And so again, that had to sort of get started in order to build this, this whole coterie of people and excitement around and enthusiasm around this type of scholarly inquiry. So at this current juncture, 2018, I do feel that it is an optimistic landscape or a great opportunity for music educators and researchers, or I guess potentially any arts educator or researcher to publish narrative research. And of course, it does make sense that there should be some areas which might end up having been stronger than others, but again, on the positive side, the gaps that do exist will have to be addressed, and hopefully by folks like us. And last but not least of this whole presentation, of course, you can see attached in Schoology my full list of references that I consulted for the lit review. I will not bother you by pasting them awkwardly into this slide, but I do want to say thank you so very much for your attention to my presentation. I sincerely hope that I covered every aspect of the project so far and how it's gone for me, and I hope that I've answered any questions that you may have about what it means to map out the landscape of narrative for music education research. If there's any lingering questions that you might have, or comments, or feedback as well, is more than welcome. As I continue progressing in my research discipline, feel more than free to comment on the Schoology link below, or within the YouTube video here that I'm uploading, or go ahead and send me an email to zotique@buffalo.edu. ZOTIQUE@buffalo.edu. Thank you so much, and I hope you have yourself a great day. Bye-bye.